Hi, I'm Carl Izzoos for CNN 10. As you can hear, I've got a bit of laryngitis today, but we've still got plenty of news to tell you about, so please bear with my voice and we'll explain what's happening in the world. 3.5 weeks after Russia invaded neighboring Ukraine, no one knows when the war will end or exactly what needs to happen to end it. In a recent phone call with the leader of Turkey, Russian President Vladimir Putin outlined his conditions for a ceasefire. They included a promise from Ukraine that it would never join NATO, an alliance of European and North American countries. The Russian leader also wants Ukraine to give up its weapons. He wants what he calls, quote, Nazification in Ukraine to stop, and he wants the nation to remove obstacles to the Russian language being widely taught there. What does Ukraine want? The government of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing for an immediate ceasefire, a stop in the fighting. It wants Russia to remove its military forces from Ukraine, and it wants Russia to give security guarantees, promises it won't attack its western neighbor in the future. Observers say negotiations between the two sides are complex and hard to figure out, and some American and NATO officials reportedly have doubts about how serious Russia is about bringing the conflict to an end. But the war is taking a toll on both sides. There have been numerous attacks on civilian sites in Ukraine, places like healthcare facilities and a theater where people were hiding. And thousands of Ukrainian and Russian troops have reportedly been killed in the fighting. Russia has a larger and more powerful military than Ukraine, but analysts say the invasion is not going as Russia hoped it would.
Russian munitions are still having a devastating impact on civilians in key cities. In Mariupol, in the capital Kiev. But Russian forces are still making little progress, advancing across Ukrainian territory. The core US assessment hasn't changed for much of the war.
The Kremlin's forces remain stalled in many areas.
And experts agree. 3 weeks in, Russia is in trouble.
No wars go according to plan. The problem is that Russia's plan was extremely bad.
The key question, why?
I would argue it is a mix of everything. It is a failed or botched concept of operation with plenty of wrong assumptions about the very nature of the battlefield. Russia believing in a way that Ukrainians would capitulate or Ukraine would crumble.
And experts believe Russia's failure to secure a quick definitive win has revealed another major flaw in its planning.
Russia's out of available combat forces to put into this fight.
Analysts say Russia's limited forces are now divided between taking territory and laying siege to major cities, reducing their ability to do both tasks effectively. And that means Russia must be reassessing what victory looks like.
At this stage, we are still talking about limited gains and goals. There's simply not enough troops potentially coming from Russia or elsewhere to do a sort of massive, full-scale ground invasion of Ukraine. Keep that territory, hold it, and then fight a very costly counter-insurrection war.
US officials say they're seeing some early efforts to boost troop numbers with foreign fighters.
We believe that out of Syria, there are perhaps very small groups of people that may be trying to make their way to Ukraine.
How the next phase of the war plays out will be significantly determined by Russia's intentions in Kiev. Trying to take the capital would likely involve months of bombardment and urban warfare.
That's going to be a tough order of business. Those Ukrainians know every single alley, every back room, every road, every intersection. The Russians are going to find themselves in a hard fight.
Slow Russian progress can help Ukrainian forces by allowing them more time to prepare and be resupplied with advanced weapons from allies. But experts say it could also inspire greater brutality from Russia, a willingness to escalate and destroy in order to compensate for its stalled invasion. Phil Black, CNN, London.
10-second trivia. Which of the following people was not a Hoosier? Dan Quayle, Neil Armstrong, Michael Jackson, or Orville Redenbacher? A Hoosier hails from Indiana, and astronaut Neil Armstrong was born in Ohio. Agriculture is a major industry in Indiana, and that makes the Hoosier State a good place for us to illustrate how the war in Ukraine is having widespread effects on global food prices. Months before the Russian invasion began, inflation was driving up the prices of gasoline and almost every category of groceries. This rise in costs was at its highest level since 1982. But Russia is one of the world's biggest exporters of fertilizer. Ukraine and Russia combined export more than 25% of the world's wheat. So while this can ultimately cause higher prices for groceries, what happens between the war and the store to cause that?
Every day, up to twice a day, like clockwork, Josh Everhart makes this trip, hauling corn and soy to the grain elevator in town. But the constant hauling of crops for his 4 trucks and record gas prices makes even the shortest journey feel like a slow burn.
You don't want to see the bill.
You don't. What
When
does
you
it
look at
like?
it, you're like, oh no.
What is it looking like?
Well, I mean, $1,000 or a 1,000-gallon tank is $4,000.
Gas prices hit a record last week, but are dropping slightly, yet still above $4 a gallon nationally and here in Indiana. Even steeper, diesel, which fills these tanks at nearly $5 a gallon.
It's astronomical, but you know, it's part of doing business.
Chris Everhart, Josh's father, says inflation has pushed prices up on just about everything on their farm, but commodity prices have risen too. This month, wheat rose to its highest price since 2008.
I've never seen anything like this in the wheat market.
For only the second time in 25 years, the Everhart family planted winter wheat, 165 acres of it, to try to capitalize on rising wheat prices. But it's a risky bet.
They're a lot higher than we ever anticipated them being. But so are inputs.
That's fuel, seed, fertilizer, and labor. And Russia's invasion into Ukraine is only pushing prices higher.
This is uncharted territory for me.
On Phil Ramsey's farm in Shelbyville, he says he's spending $500,000 more to plant his crops this year. The only thing softening that blow, the higher price he'll hopefully get for his wheat, soy, and corn.
How much does what is happening in Ukraine impact you here on the farm?
I'm happy that the prices are going up. I am not happy about the situation because even though they're a competitor of ours, it's kind of like playing sports. You don't want to see somebody on the other team get hurt.
And fertilizer has become their biggest expense because it's made from natural gas, which has also risen significantly. A key supplier, Russia, has stopped exporting it.
How much more does it take to fill up those bins behind me this year compared to last year?
Today's cost is $60,000 more per tank. I have 4 tanks. That's $240,000.
And those prices are much slower to come down compared to the volatile price of crops.
We just lose money when that happens. It's only happened a few times in my farming career, but this one's totally different than any that I've been through in 43 years.
Vanessa Yurkevich, CNN, East Morristown, Indiana.
To many people, it might have looked like a big old block of rock with some ridges in it. But to this man, who just happens to have a deep interest in prehistoric animals, it's the tooth of a woolly mammoth. Justin Blowett was recently observing a construction site in Iowa when he spotted it. It's 11 inches long and weighs more than 11 pounds, and a paleontology instructor at the University of Iowa thinks it's thousands of years old. Its weight explains why the tooth fairy left it alone. But if you're enamored with the roots of paleontology, on the lookout for bones that cemented their place and made a dent in history, it's no mammoth tusk to find the tooth, the whole tooth, and nothing but the tooth. I'm Carl Azus, and we've got love for Loveland High School today. Shout out to our viewers watching from Loveland, Ohio, and thank you for subscribing and leaving a comment on our YouTube channel.